Hey everybody, so today we are going to be talking about Mr. Dueling Cane himself, Elend Venture, but before I go any further, spoiler alert for Mistborn Era 1, I'm going to be talking about specifics from the series, so if you haven't read the series, go pick it up. It's incredible. But without further ado, so basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about what I feel Ellen does, like what his purpose is for each of the books. So in the first book, I feel like we see Ellen. He is an ideologue, obviously, and I feel like what is so interesting about Ellen in the first book, at least to me, is that he rings very true as a character. Like I feel like there are real Ellens that exist like in the world. There's these people who are like born like very wealthy, but like they really like want to make a difference, and they like feel like they're like making a difference, like them and maybe some of their other rich friends. Maybe they read some Noam Chomsky or something. They're like, we're gonna really make a difference, and it's a lot of this idealism, and there's they acknowledge maybe that certain systems aren't working right, but they want to make things better, and they think that they themselves can make things better, and they have these very idealistic views. So that's obviously one that's kind of who Elend is in the first book. And obviously he serves as a love interest for Vin. I feel like his relationship with Vin at the end of the book, I find it just so heartwarming. I think it's like one of the final chapters of the first book, when Vin like crawls into Ellen's window, and she like talks about how like she feels safe and like happy, and it's just so satisfying after such an emotional sequence of events. I really I always appreciated Elend just for the comfort that he provides to Vin, even if I don't always like Elend like as a person. I do like what he does for Vin. And then when in terms of another really interesting, I think, aspect of Elend is Elend represents Kelsier thinking that maybe the nobles aren't so bad. Like Elend is what turned like this young, idealistic kid. Obviously, Vin's romantic interest in him had a huge factor, but Kelsier got to see maybe the nobles aren't so bad. And he saves Elend, and that's where I got my Dueling Cane reference from, just because when he like when Kelsier and is like trying to have his final showdown with the Lord Ruler, like Elend shows up and he's got his Dueling Cane and he's trying to make a scene, and he just almost goes horribly for him. But I find that scene hilarious. But no, just kind of demonstrating that the nobles might not all be bad. And this is, I mean, these are Kelsier's final moments that we're talking about, and for him to save Ellen was really just a signal for a lot of growth on Kelsier's part. But we're not talking about Kelsier. But I do think that that is what Ellen kind of represents in that first book. And also, I think I can't talk about Ellen without noting I wish I'd heard that speech that he gives at the end of the first book. I remember they said like he gave this great speech, and I'm like, well, that's awful convenient, Brandon Sanderson, that you can't actually write the speech for me and let me hear it. I just get to hear about it secondhand. But that's that's obviously just joking around. And so then in the second book, we get King Elend, and we get to see him. It's ironic because he starts as a king, um, and as he like loses power, you see him becoming more and more of a leader. And right away, we see that his idealism and the way that he wants everything to be so perfect, and he tries to be so good, and this is ultimately his downfall, when he ultimately loses to Penrod in the election, and just he tries so hard to be perfect. And then I feel like a huge character moment for Ellen is in towards the final sequence of events in the books, when we see Ellen executes his friend, Jace, I believe his name was, and that was huge. And I feel like that is huge foreshadowing for who Ellen kind of becomes in the third book, where he becomes more of a pragmatist, and he's willing to compromise on this idealism that he had so long thought was so important. And I find that just crazy that this begins with the execution of someone who used to be a good friend of his. And so, but yeah, in the second book, I also find it a little bit ironic that Ellen doesn't actually his like leadership. He becomes a better leader thanks to Tyndall. But it's Vin like winning the battle that allows him to become emperor. So I think it's really funny that ultimately Ellen is, whether how good of a leader he became was kind of irrelevant, because Vin, I'm sure, would have let him be emperor regardless. That's again just joking though. And then in the third book, I feel like he had kind of the least impactful that he was of the three books. Not to say that like the third book was like worse or anything. And Ellen's role specifically, I feel like his main what we saw from him is that yes, he became more utilitarian in the way that he saw things. He understood that maybe like sacrifices need to happen for what will hopefully be a greater good. And I think that that was some really interesting development. I feel like his arc is fairly satisfying. We can see him going from this, this bushy ideologue, and then he becomes a much more hardened kind of pragmatic ruler, and I find that interesting. But obviously, his biggest kind of influence in the third book, Hero of Ages, is allowing himself to be killed, and giving Vin that final push to attack Ruin, and that's obviously really sad, and I think shows ultimately he was able to be pragmatic about himself, which I think makes his arc a little bit more satisfying, in my opinion. When you consider how he ends up, is that obviously in an ideal situation, maybe he survives and they beat the bad guy, but he had grown into learning that it's not always exactly how you want things, and sometimes losses need to be suffered, and he understood that he was one of those losses, and I feel like that makes him. It really makes you respect him a little bit more as a leader, because it's what's one thing when like a military leader goes like, oh, it's okay if these people die, like it's for the greater good, but when that leader is able to sacrifice themselves as well for the greater good, I feel like that does add like an element of respect. I mean, talk about Kelsey or becoming a martyr. But I think that really it is the icing on the cake, in my opinion, for what is already a fairly satisfying arc with Ellen. It's just him sacrificing himself, giving Vin that final push that she needed to attack Ruin. And I think it really kind of sums up who he had always been as a character. He existed for Vin, kind of like he always served as like motivation for Vin. And I think that's great. I mean, Vin is awesome, and I think that it's such a sad ending. I mean, just that image of the two of them lying there in the flowers, is just whew, gets me every time. I won't talk about it too much. Don't need to get all teared up in the video, but I really enjoy Elend as a character. Is he my favorite Mistborn character? No, definitely not. But I think that he is really cool. I think he has a really interesting arc, and I hope you guys enjoyed this kind of deep dive. If you guys have any recommendations on how you think I should do these differently, please leave a comment down below, and also comment like what you enjoyed about it, what you didn't enjoy. Just let me know what you guys think. But if you did enjoy, make sure to like and subscribe, and have a great day.